So there is gold everywhere. Most people are not trained to see it.
Right.
That is a direct quote from a Peruvian gold miner who had literally been digging in the dirt for, I think it was 45 years. And when someone asked him how he maintained this just absolute confidence that he'd find the next vein of gold, that was his response. He didn't say he had better map. He didn't say he had, better equipment. He just had better eyes.
Yeah, better perception.
Exactly. So welcome to the deep dive. Today we're looking at a stack of source material that effectively acts as LASIK surgery for your financial vision.
It's really the perfect starting point because that miner completely inverts how most of us are taught to look at opportunity.
Right. Totally inverts it.
We're conditioned to view wealth or capital or really any high-level success as this incredibly scarce resource. We think it's hidden away in vaults or reserved for people who hit the genetic lottery or the geographic lottery. But a guy with half a century of experience pulling actual physical wealth out of the ground is telling us the exact opposite.
The resource is abundant.
Exactly. The deficit is entirely in our perception.
Yeah.
And that's the core mission of our analysis today. We are breaking down a highly specific 10-step framework from the source material designed to awaken what the text calls your financial genius.
I think we need to address that term right out of the gate, financial genius. Because a lot of people listening might instantly roll their eyes at that.
Oh, absolutely. They're thinking,
listen, I barely scraped by in high school calculus, right?
Yeah.
My portfolio is just a standard index fund I don't even look at. I do not have a financial genius. But the source material is completely uncompromising on this point. It argues that every single person has this latent capacity. The problem isn't that it doesn't exist. The problem is that it's been put into a medically induced coma by modern culture.
Right, a coma. Because if you look at the conditioning we all undergo, the sheer weight of the cultural narrative is just staggering.
Yeah, it really is.
We are handed a very specific set of dogmas from the moment we can understand language. We're taught that the love of money is the root of all evil, which, instantly attaches a moral penalty to the pursuit of wealth.
It makes it dirty.
Exactly. We're funneled into an educational system that explicitly trains us to learn a profession so we can trade our time for a paycheck. We are essentially trained to be highly functional components in someone else's machine.
And the implicit promise of that cultural contract is, don't worry about the macro picture. Don't worry about the future. A massive corporation or the government will step in and take care of you when your utility as a worker runs out.
Which is a very dangerous assumption.
Extremely dangerous. The text argues that this specific lack of financial education, combined with a false sense of security, is the actual anesthetic that puts your financial genius to sleep.
And the stats backing up the consequences of that sleep are pretty grim. The material notes that 90% of the Western world simply buys into this dogma wholesale.
90%.
90%. And honestly, it's because it's the path of least resistance. It is objectively easier in the short term to just get a job, execute your task, collect your paycheck, and spend it on things that make you feel good.
Yeah, and the system has evolved to perfectly accommodate the gaps in that lifestyle. You run out of money before the end of the month? No problem. Here's a frictionless way to borrow more against your future labor.
Credit cards, loans, financing.
It becomes an infinite loop of working, spending, and borrowing.
But the people listening to this deep dive aren't here to figure out how to be a better cog in that machine.
No, they're not.
The entire point of going through these 10 steps is to break that cycle. We aren't just going to rattle off a checklist today. We need to dissect the psychology, the friction points, and the actual mechanics behind these steps so you can actively train yourself to see the goal that is quite literally sitting in your blind spot right now.
Okay, let's unpack this. We're getting into part 1 of the framework, which is the internal foundation. This is all about spirit and choice. Step 1 is titled, Find a Reason Greater Than Reality, or the Power of Spirit. Now, I want to unpack this because on the surface, it sounds like typical motivational poster fluff, hang in there.
Not on a branch.
Exactly. But the author's point is incredibly practical. Just saying I want to be wealthy is structurally insufficient to get you through the friction of actually doing it.
It's not enough fuel.
Not nearly enough. Building wealth outside the traditional 90% track is punishingly hard. There are brutal setbacks. If your motivation is just a vague preference for having more money, the reality of the process will absolutely crush you.
It will snap you in half.
Yeah.
To illustrate the kind of psychological armor required, The source brings up an anecdote about a young woman training for the United States Olympic swimming team.
Right.
When you audit her reality, it is completely miserable. I mean, she is out of bed at 4 o'clock in the morning every single day, regardless of the weather or how she feels.
Every day.
She spends 3 hours doing grueling physical labor in a freezing pool before most people her age have even woken up for school. It's wild. On weekends, when her peers are out socializing, she's either training, recovering, or studying to maintain her academic eligibility. It is a life defined by intense, relentless sacrifice.
Yeah.
But when someone finally asked her what fueled that level of masochism, she didn't say, "I really like swimming." She said she did it for herself and the people she loved. She explicitly stated, "It's love that gets me over the hurdles and sacrifices."
So the author takes that raw emotional core and translates it into a formula for financial resilience. He says your reason has to be a composite of two extreme forces: deep emotional wants and deep emotional don't wants.
Yeah.
What I found fascinating and frankly a little counterintuitive is that he starts with the don't wants. He leans heavily into negative motivation.
Because from a purely behavioral standpoint, human beings are far more motivated to avoid pain than they are to acquire pleasure.
Yeah.
The author is very transparent about his own psychological engine here. His don't wants were intensely personal and visceral. He deeply resented the idea of working his entire life as an employee, subject to someone else's whims.
Yeah, he hated it.
He looked at the traditional middle-class dream his parents worshipped, the illusion of job security and a quiet house in the suburbs, and felt totally repulsed by it.
Yeah.
He also harbored a deep anger over the fact that his father missed all of his childhood football games because he was chained to his job.
He also brings up the estate tax issue,
Yeah.
which is a massive driver for him.
Oh, huge driver.
He watched his father grind his entire life, playing by the rules of the system, only to have a significant portion of his accumulated wealth absorbed by the government at death through estate taxes. The author viewed that as the ultimate insult, that his father couldn't even effectively pass the fruits of his labor on to his children. He noted that the ultra-wealthy don't play by those rules. They structure their assets in trusts and corporate entities specifically to bypass that fate. He wanted off the track where his family's wealth could be confiscated.
Exactly. Those intense negative emotions, the anger, frustration, resentment toward a system he felt was rigged against the middle class, those were the crucible that forged his positive wants.
The wants came second.
Right. Because he hated the idea of missing his kids' games, he wanted absolute sovereignty over his time. Because he hated the geographical lock-in of a standard job, he wanted the freedom to travel the world while he was still young and healthy enough to actually enjoy it.
He didn't just want a big bank account.
No, he wanted money to operate as his employee, working 24 hours a day so he didn't have to.
But let me play devil's advocate here for a second. A lot of modern psychology warns against running on negative motivation. They say if you're driven by anger or resentment, you're going to burn out or become miserable even if you achieve the goal. Does the text address the sustainability of this? Because he admits it took him till he was 47 to achieve true financial freedom, and he lost a ton of money along the way. Can someone really run on don't wants for 2 decades?
That's a crucial distinction. The negative emotions are the ignition. They're not the sustained fuel. The don't wants jolt you out of your complacency. They get you to wake up at 4 a.m. the first 100 times. But the wants, the love for your family, the desire for freedom, the intellectual thrill of mastering the game, that's what sustains you through the decades.
And that makes a lot of sense.
The source material's warning to you, the listener, is very stark. You need to sit down and rigorously audit your own emotional reasons. If you don't have a white-hot core of wants and don't wants, you might as well turn off the audio now. Because the mechanics we are about to discuss require a level of discipline that casual curiosity simply cannot support.
Which is the perfect bridge to step 2, make daily choices. This is the power of choice, and it shifts us from the philosophical to the highly practical.
Yes.
We talk about living in a free society, and we usually associate that with voting or freedom of speech. But the text makes the argument that your most frequent and consequential exercise of freedom happens every time a dollar lands in your hand.
Every single time.
Every single dollar is a ballot cast for your future financial status, rich, poor, or middle class.
What's fascinating here is how you cast those ballots is a flawless reflection of your internal priorities.
It really exposes you.
It does. The author argues that the vast majority of people choose not to be wealthy simply because the required learning curve is too steep. It's too much of a hassle.
Yeah, it's hard work.
But they rarely admit that. Instead, they camouflage their choice with highly socially acceptable excuses. They say things like, I'm just not that interested in money, or I'm young, I have decades to figure this out, or my partner is the one who handles the spreadsheets.
Those sound like harmless deflections, but the text treats them as incredibly dangerous mental viruses.
Because they actively rob you of your two most irreplaceable assets, your time and your capacity to learn.
Right.
The author is merciless on this point. He states that having a zero balance in your bank account is never a valid excuse for having a stagnant mind.
I love the statistic he pulls to illustrate this cultural blind spot.
Yeah.
He points out that 90% of the population will happily finance a massive television set, but only about 10% will spend $20 on a business book.
Priorities.
Priorities. And there's this incredible, albeit dark, story about a friend of his whose apartment was burglarized.
Oh, the book story.
Yeah. The thieves broke in, completely stripped the place of all its electronics, the TVs, the stereo system, the gaming consoles. But when the friend walked back in, every single book on his shelf was untouched.
It's the perfect microcosm of societal values.
It really is.
The thieves prioritized immediate entertainment and depreciating assets over the tools for wealth creation, which is exactly what the 90% do every day. The author, conversely, treats his mind as his primary capital asset.
His mind is the asset.
Right. He shares a defining story from 1973. He saw an advertisement on television for a 3-day seminar on real estate foreclosures. The cost was $385.
We'll have to contextualize that, because in 1973, $385 was a serious chunk of change.
It was.
That's well over $2,000 today. For a guy who wasn't wealthy yet, that's a massive allocation of resources.
It was a huge risk. But he traces at least $2 million of his eventual net worth directly back to the specific mechanics he learned in that single weekend.
That's an insane return on investment.
But the ROI wasn't just financial. He states that the course bought him life.
Bought him life.
The knowledge he acquired allowed him to compress decades of required labor into a few years of strategic investing. That is the compounding power of choosing education over entertainment. He actually formalized this into a personal rule, committing to attend at least 2 immersive, high-level seminars every single year, regardless of his current net worth.
And his consumption habits for daily learning are just as intense. He talks about his strategy for listening to audio content, which is fascinating.
Yeah.
He mentions listening to an interview with an investor. Imagine someone listening to a deep dive like this and hearing the expert make a point that he completely fundamentally disagreed with.
Yeah.
Now, the baseline human reaction when we hear something that conflicts with our worldview is to reject it, right? To get defensive and mentally shut down.
Confirmation bias is incredibly powerful.
Very powerful.
But the author trained himself to override that instinct. Instead of ejecting the tape, he would rewind that specific 5-minute segment and listen to it 20 or 30 times in a row.
That requires an almost unnatural level of intellectual humility.
It does. But the payoff is what he calls mental synergy. By forcing his brain to sit in the discomfort of a clashing idea, he eventually broke through his own cognitive resistance.
He didn't just reject it.
No. He didn't necessarily abandon his original thesis, but he suddenly understood the architecture of the other investor's argument. He gained a new lens.
Right.
And when you collect enough of those lenses, you can start asking yourself highly complex analytical questions. You can look at a piece of real estate or a market fluctuation and ask, how would Donald Trump underwrite this deal? How would Warren Buffett assess the long-term value here? How would George Soros play the currency angle?
You're borrowing their brains.
Exactly. You cannot access a multidisciplinary brain trust if you are too proud to genuinely listen to opposing views.
Which leads right into his definition of arrogance.
Uh-huh.
And it's one of the sharpest definitions I've ever heard. He doesn't define arrogance as just being boastful. He defines arrogance as high intelligence combined with a refusal to learn. He argues that arrogant people rarely read deeply or listen to experts because they fundamentally believe they are the center of the intellectual universe.
Yeah, they think they know it all.
When a new paradigm threatens their existing worldview, they don't get curious. They use their formidable intelligence to construct elaborate defenses for their ignorance. So in his formula, intelligence plus arrogance equals profound ignorance.
Truly intelligent people, the ones who consistently compound their wealth and knowledge, actively hunt for clashing ideas. They understand that listening is an infinitely higher leverage activity than speaking.
For sure.
The author points out the hypocrisy of how people approach risk. You wouldn't dream of jumping into the cockpit of a commercial airliner and trying to fly it without hundreds of hours of simulation and lessons.
Obviously not.
Yet everyday people will pull equity out of their homes to buy individual stocks or commercial real estate without ever investing a dime in their greatest asset, their financial education. He takes a very long view. He despises the casino mentality. He might swing trade stocks, but he is always permanently long on his own education.
Okay, let's transition to part 2, the external environment. We've fortified the internal mindset. Now we have to look at the ecosystem you operate in, starting with the people around you.
The network.
Step 3 is choose friends. Carefully, the power of association. The author makes a very crucial clarification right up front here. He does not screen his friends by asking for their balance sheets.
No, he doesn't.
He has close friends who have literally taken vows of poverty, and he has friends who pull down tens of millions of dollars a year.
The differentiator isn't their net worth, it's what he strategically extracts from those relationships.
Right.
He doesn't hang around his wealthy friends to pitch them deals or ask for handouts. He seeks out their knowledge because for the ultra-wealthy, the mechanics of money is their passion, it's their craft.
They love talking about it.
They talk about capital flows, tax strategy, and market inefficiencies the way other people talk about fantasy football. It's an exchange of high-level ideas. On the flip side, his friends who are chronically broke actively avoid the topic.
They hate talking about it.
They view money talk as gauche, stressful, or unintellectual, but he still learns from them. He treats their financial behaviors as a masterclass in what not to do.
Here's where it gets really interesting. He highlights this tragic phenomenon that I think anyone who has achieved a modicum of success has experienced. He talks about having a few friends who are literal billionaires.
Yeah.
And all of them report the exact same frustration regarding their old friends who are still struggling. The struggling friends will constantly reach out, but they never, ever ask the billionaires how they built their wealth. They never ask for the underlying formula. They only ever ask for 2 things, a loan or a job.
It's the classic give a man a fish scenario playing out in real life. Instead of asking for the blueprint to the bakery, they just beg for a slice of bread. But the author also warns about a specific type of friend you have to actively insulate yourself from when you start investing, the chicken littles.
Oh, the chicken littles. We all know them.
We do.
These are the people who, the second you mention a new investment, immediately start screaming that the sky is falling. They have an encyclopedic knowledge of why every single deal is doomed to fail.
He shares a very telling example of this. A friend of his was incredibly proud to be earning a safe, predictable 6% return on a certificate of deposit.
A CD.
A CD. The author mentioned, almost in passing, that he was currently earning a 16% return on an investment backed by the state government.
16%.
The chicken little friend couldn't handle the discrepancy. The very next day, he sent the author a multi-page news article detailing all the macroeconomic reasons why a 16% return was inherently dangerous and on the verge of collapse.
And the punchline. Years later, the author is still quietly collecting his 16%, and the friend is still locked in at 6%, feeling very vindicated in his safety.
The real danger of the chicken littles isn't that they are annoying, it's that their fear is highly contagious.
Very contagious.
If you aren't guarding your mind and you blindly absorb their doom and gloom data, you eventually become a chicken little yourself. You become paralyzed.
Yeah.
The text uses a phenomenal analogy here to explain market timing, comparing sophisticated investors to experienced surfers. When you're sitting out on a surfboard, you don't panic and try to paddle furiously to catch a wave that has already passed.
No.
You understand the cyclical nature of the ocean. You know there is always another swell building on the horizon. The people who get crushed are the ones who show up late, see everyone else riding a wave, and try to desperately paddle into it right as it's cresting.
Right. The golden rule he lays out is, if a hot investment is already the headline on the front page of the financial papers, the wave has crested. You are too late. Retail investors act like a herd of sheep. They follow the crowd into whatever asset class is currently booming, driven entirely by FOMO and greed, and they're usually buying those assets at peak prices from the smart money who got in early and are now happily cashing out.
The smart money is leaving.
Yeah, the wealthy buy when there is blood in the streets, when an asset is deeply unpopular. They understand that your profit is locked in when you buy, not when you sell. They position themselves in the trough of the wave and patiently wait for the crowd to drive the price up.
Which brings us to a term the text uses that usually makes compliance departments sweat: insider trading.
Let's clarify that.
We have to be exceptionally clear here. There are illegal forms of insider trading, trading on non-public material information as a corporate fiduciary, which will send you to federal prison.
We are not recommending that.
Not at all. But the author is talking about legal insider trading, which is essentially just information arbitrage. The entire game of investing is about proximity to high-quality information. The further away you are from the source, the lower your returns and the higher your risk.
It's an information game.
Having a network of wealthy, active investors is a massive competitive advantage because they are closer to the inside. You want to hear the rumblings of a market shift before the herd reads about it on social media. You want to get into the asset, ride the institutional wave, and exit before the retail bust. Your network is your early warning system.
Okay, let's dive into step 4, which builds on that need for speed. Master a formula, and then learn a new one. This is the power of learning quickly.
Yes.
We've all heard the dietary adage, you are what you eat. The author applies that to the intellect, you become what you study. If you obsessively study French cuisine, you become a chef. If you obsessively study standard accounting, you become an accountant.
And if we look objectively at the formula the vast majority of the population studies regarding money, it's what the author bluntly calls the caveman formula.
A caveman formula.
It's the industrial age blueprint handed down through the school system. You wake up, you go to a job, you earn a fixed amount of money, you pay your bills, you try to balance your checkbook, you maybe auto-draft 5% into a mutual fund you don't understand, and you repeat that process until you physically can't work anymore. It is a slow, highly taxed, grinding formula. The author's thesis is simple. If you are exhausted by the results you are getting, you cannot just work harder. You have to fundamentally change the formula you're operating under.
Which brings us back to that $385 real estate class he took in his 20s. He didn't just learn a new formula conceptually, he executed it with ruthless discipline. He was still working a demanding corporate job at Xerox, but in his spare time, he spent 3 straight years doing nothing but mastering the specific mechanics of buying foreclosures. He drove neighborhoods, analyzed deals, and made offers until it was second nature. And that single formula made him a multimillionaire.
But the hallmark of his financial genius is that once he mastered the foreclosure formula, he didn't coast.
Right. He didn't stop there.
He immediately recognized that markets evolve and relying on one trick is dangerous. So he aggressively hunted for the next formula. He started attending highly specialized intensive classes on derivative trading, commodity options, and even something called chaology.
Okay, let's pause on that because when I first read it, I had to look it up. Chaology or chaos theory. He's sitting in rooms surrounded by nuclear physicists and rocket scientists. How on earth does a real estate guy use chaos theory?
It sounds absurd on the surface, but it's actually brilliant. Chaos theory, at its core, is the study of underlying patterns, interconnectedness, and deterministic laws in systems that appear completely random or chaotic.
Like the weather.
Think about weather systems or fluid dynamics, or, in the author's case, global financial markets. To the untrained eye, a stock market crash or a real estate bubble popping looks like random, terrifying chaos.
Just total panic.
But by studying the physics of chaotic systems, he was training his brain to spot the deep, non-linear patterns that govern human economic behavior. He was learning how a microscopic shift in interest rates in one country could trigger a massive wave in a seemingly unrelated real estate market on the other side of the world.
That's incredibly high level.
He felt completely out of his depth academically, but combining that high-level abstract pattern recognition with his street-level real estate experience created a staggeringly lucrative synergy.
So synthesizing this for you, the listener, the meta lesson here is that we live in an era of exponential technological and economic change. The static knowledge you acquired 5 years ago is rapidly depreciating.
It's obsolete.
Relying on what you already know is a losing strategy. The ultimate superpower isn't your current database of facts, it is your velocity of learning. How fast can you absorb a completely foreign concept, synthesize it, and deploy it in the real world?
That agility leads us directly into the mechanics of wealth. This is where we get into the heavy lifting of discipline and professional advice. Step 5 is arguably the fulcrum on which this entire philosophy balances. Pay yourself first.
Oh boy.
The author does not mince words here. He states unequivocally that if you do not possess ironclad self-discipline, you should abandon the idea of getting rich entirely.
He really throws down the gauntlet there. He points to the classic examples, lottery winners who secure tens of millions of dollars and are somehow bankrupt within 5 years. Or the employee who finally gets the big promotion and immediately finances a luxury SUV they don't need.
Lifestyle creep.
Exactly. The brutal truth is that if you lack internal control, an influx of external cash will just accelerate your ruin. The market, the banks, the advertisers, the world will constantly push you around and extract your wealth if you don't build a fortress.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, he contextualizes this through the lens of entrepreneurship. He consults with a lot of business owners, and he sees a common fatal flaw.
What's that?
They obsess over their product or their marketing, but they fail to master the three critical management pillars: the management of cash flow, the management of personnel, and the management of their own personal time. All three of those pillars are built entirely on the bedrock of self-discipline.
Let's really dissect pay yourself first, because it's become a cliche. It originated a century ago in The Richest Man in Babylon. Everyone has heard it. Every personal finance blogger repeats it. But the author argues that practically no one actually executes it correctly.
To understand why, we have to look at the flow of money, and the text uses these great visual accounting diagrams. We all know the basic structure. You have an income statement at the top, tracking money coming in and expenses going out.
Right.
Below that, you have a balance sheet, tracking assets, things that put money in your pocket, and liabilities, things that take money out. For the 90% of the population who operate on the caveman formula, they pay everyone else first.
The government first.
Their salary hits their income statement, and the very first thing that happens is the government takes its cut in taxes. Then the money flows straight down into the expense column. The landlord gets paid, the credit card company gets paid, the grocery store gets paid. Only then, at the very end of the month, if there is miraculously a few $100s left, do they redirect it into the asset column as savings or investments. They are structurally paying themselves last.
The wealthy flip the plumbing. When their income arrives, the very first arrow on the diagram bypasses the expense column entirely and points straight into the asset column.
Straight to asset.
They fund their investments, they acquire income-producing real estate, they buy equities before they pay a single operational expense.
Now, the pushback to this is always immediate and visceral.
Right. I'll be the voice of the listener here. People are yelling at their speakers. That's completely irresponsible. I have a mortgage. I have utility bills. I can't just buy a stock and tell the electric company I'm paying myself first. My credit score will be ruined.
It's a natural reaction.
And the author actually addresses this with a story from his own life that is highly controversial. He admits there were periods where his cash flow was severely restricted and the money coming in was far less than his monthly liabilities. His bookkeeper was having a panic attack, warning him that his credit was going to be destroyed, that collectors were going to start calling.
And what was his response? He held the line, he still paid himself first, he transferred the capital into his asset column, and he let the creditors and the government scream. He intentionally created a crisis.
But wait, let me challenge this. How is that not just terrible, reckless financial advice? Intentionally defaulting on obligations to buy an asset seems like a fast track to bankruptcy, not wealth. How does he justify that level of extreme risk?
It's a profound psychological tactic. He draws a hard distinction between what he calls a poor habit and a wealthy habit. The poor habit, when faced with a cash crunch, is to dip into your savings or liquidate your assets to pay off consumer debt. You cannibalize your own future to appease the present.
You eat your seed corn.
Exactly. The author refused to do that. He viewed his asset column as a sacred fortress, and he was the general defending fort assets. By paying himself first and leaving his bills momentarily unfunded, he generated an immense amount of psychological pressure.
So it was a forcing function.
Precisely. Instead of taking the easy way out and raiding his savings, he used the sheer terror of those unpaid bills to violently awaken his financial genius. The pressure forced his brain to hustle. It forced him to innovate, to find a side hustle, to negotiate a new deal, to create new income streams specifically to pay the creditors. He used the threat of ruin to expand his capacity to generate cash.
Now, we have to add the massive caveat he includes, because he isn't suggesting you go max out credit cards and then ignore the bills. Rule number 1 in his philosophy is to keep your personal expenses extremely low in the first place.
Keep liabilities down.
Do not accumulate liabilities. Build the asset column first, and then eventually let the cash flow from those assets buy the luxury car or the bigger house. But his point is, when you inevitably hit a wall, you use the pressure to grow your income. You don't shrink your assets to pay the debt.
It requires a level of internal fortitude most people simply don't possess. The world is designed to bully you into parting with your money. Bill collectors use intimidation tactics. Marketing algorithms create artificial urgency.
Yeah.
Salespeople pressure you to finance purchases.
It's relentless.
Having the absolute guts to stand against that tide, to endure the discomfort of pressure while protecting your capital, is the defining characteristic of the wealthy. If you cannot stomach that pressure, the author says very frankly, you should take the vow of the average. Put your money in a low-yield savings account, pay your taxes on time, and accept a mediocre financial destiny. But you cannot have wealth without mastering the discipline of paying yourself first.
Moving on to step 6, which challenges another deeply ingrained middle-class habit. Pay your brokers well. This is about leveraging the power of good advice, and he points out this hilarious but totally accurate hypocrisy in how we value services.
This is so true.
People will go to a mediocre restaurant, receive terrible service from a waiter who forgets their order, and they will still blindly tip 15 to 20%. They are happily putting money directly into their expense column out of social obligation. But those exact same people will scream bloody murder about paying a 3 to 7% commission to a commercial real estate broker or a specialized stockbroker.
It reveals a fundamental misunderstanding of what an asset is. A high-performing professional, an aggressive attorney, a creative tax accountant, an inside track broker is not an expense, they are an asset.
They bring value.
Their primary function is to make you money and buy back your time. The author ruthlessly mocks the mentality behind discount brokers or people who stick a for sale by owner sign in their front yard to avoid paying a commission. If you are spending your weekends fielding calls from unqualified buyers just to save a few $1,000s, you're placing a remarkably low value on your own time. Time that could be spent analyzing high-yield investments.
He tells a great story to drive this home. He found a piece of vacant land for $9,000, but he didn't find the buyer. His broker did. The broker brought him a buyer willing to pay over $25,000 almost immediately.
Incredible.
The profit from that flip allowed the author to buy a Porsche he had his eye on. Why on earth would you try to negotiate a lower commission with the person who is actively handing you a $16,000 profit while you're out playing golf? A good broker is your boots on the ground. They are your eyes and ears in the market every single day.
However, the text provides a massive, non-negotiable caveat here. Not all brokers are created equal.
Very true.
In fact, a vast majority of them are not investors at all. They are simply salespeople executing a script. They don't own the products they are pitching you. The author advises that when you sit down to interview any paid professional, you shouldn't just ask about their fees. You should aggressively interrogate their personal portfolio.
I love that approach.
If you are hiring a real estate broker, ask them exactly how many commercial properties they personally own. If it's a stockbroker, ask what percentage of their net worth is in the specific fund they are recommending. If it's a tax accountant, ask what aggressive strategies they use on their own returns.
That is the ultimate litmus test. He actually shares that he fired a highly competent small business accountant because the accountant's personal investments were all in standard mutual funds. He switched to a new accountant simply because the new guy's primary business was real estate.
Better alignment.
The alignment of interest was better. You want advisors who are actively in the trenches playing the same game you are playing.
This circles back perfectly to the management skills we discussed in Step 5. When we talk about managing people, we usually think of managing entry-level employees. But the ultimate executive skill is learning how to manage, incentivize, and reward people who are significantly smarter and more technically proficient than you are.
You're building a board of directors.
You are the CEO, and your accountant, attorney, and broker are your personal board of directors. If you treat them with respect and pay them handsomely when they perform, they will bend over backwards to bring you the best deals before anyone else sees them.
All right, let's pivot to the strategy portion. Now we're getting into the actual deployment of capital. Step 7 is titled, Be an Indian Giver. Now, the author provides the historical context for this term so we understand the underlying mechanic. He explains it originated from a tragic comedy of cultural misunderstanding between early European settlers in America and Native American tribes.
Right.
A Native American might give a freezing settler a blanket, viewing it as a temporary provision to help them survive the winter. The settler, operating under European concepts of property, viewed the blanket as a permanent, irrevocable gift. When the Native American asked for the blanket back in the spring, the settlers were outraged. coining the term.
Well, the origin is fraught. The author strips it down to its core mechanical principle, the power of getting something for nothing.
Something for nothing.
This raises an important question. That is, the very first calculation a sophisticated investor runs when evaluating a potential deal. They don't just ask about the yield, they ask exactly how fast do I get my initial capital returned to me.
Return of investment, not just on investment.
They are obsessed with the velocity of money and the ROI. But more importantly, they want to know what asset they are left holding for free once their initial risk is off the table. They want a permanent piece of the action.
He breaks this down with a phenomenal real estate example that is so clean it should be taught in schools. He found a condominium in Arizona that had been foreclosed on. The bank was desperate to get it off their books and was asking $60,000.
Okay.
The author comes in and submits a bid for $50,000. But the kicker is he attached a cashier's check for the full $50,000 in cash to the offer. He bypassed the entire financing contingency process. The bank, seeing guaranteed immediate liquidity, accepted the lowball offer.
Now, conventional financial wisdom would scream at him for doing this. The average financial advisor would say, why would you tie up $50,000 of liquid cash in a single asset? Get a standard 30-year mortgage, put 10% down, and leverage the bank's money.
But his strategy was entirely different because he understood the Indian giver principle. He took that condo and turned it into a high-yield seasonal rental.
The snowbirds.
During the peak winter months, he rented it to snowbirds coming down from the north for $2,500 a month. During the brutal Arizona summers, he dropped the rent to $1,000 a month just to keep it occupied. When you run that math, after expenses, he was able to completely recoup his initial $50,000 cash investment in just over 3 years.
And this is the magic trick. After month 36, his original $50,000 is fully replenished in his bank account, ready to be deployed into the next deal.
So his risk is gone.
His risk is now absolute zero. But he still holds the deed to the condominium. The asset is entirely free, and every single dollar of rent that comes in from month 37 until the end of time is pure, infinite return.
It's beautiful.
He executes the exact same maneuver in the equities market. If his broker gives him an inside tip on a stock, he'll buy in heavily. If the stock appreciates significantly, he immediately sells enough shares to pull out his original principal. He lets the remaining shares ride. If the company goes bankrupt the next day, he loses nothing. If it goes to the moon, he rides a completely free asset.
This completely reframes the concept of risk. The 90% who are terrified of losing money park their capital in a safe high-yield savings account or a CD. Yes, the principal is protected, but the returns barely match inflation, and you certainly never acquire an underlying asset for free. The author's rule is non-negotiable. He only plays with speculative capital he can afford to lose, but he will not enter a deal unless there is a clear mechanism to extract his initial capital while retaining a free asset, whether that's a cash-flowing property, a piece of raw land, or a block of shares.
He brings up the legendary example of Ray Kroc and McDonald's to solidify this point. Most people think Ray Kroc built an empire selling hamburgers and French fries. But Kroc himself famously told a class of MBA students that his business wasn't food, his business was real estate.
Real estate.
He used the franchise model, the allure of a turnkey hamburger business, to convince franchise owners to pay the mortgage on prime commercial real estate that Kroc's corporation ultimately controlled. He used the operational cash flow of the restaurants to acquire billions of dollars of real estate, essentially for free.
That is an absolute masterclass in financial architecture, and it flows seamlessly into Step 8, which deals with how we handle the profits from those assets. Use assets to buy luxuries. This is the power of focus.
A great step.
And the story he uses here is arguably the most relatable, practical piece of behavioral economics in the entire text. A friend of the author comes to him in a panic because his 16-year-old son is relentlessly begging for a car.
Naturally.
And the kid has a point. He has actually saved up a few $1,000s from working, and he wants to drain his entire savings account to use as a down payment on a car because all the other parents are buying their kids' cars.
The father is torn. He asks the author, do I just buy the car for him to keep the peace? Or do I let him drain his hard-earned savings on a depreciating liability?
So what does he say?
The author tells him to do neither. He advises the father to use the son's burning emotional desire for this luxury as a psychological lever to force him to learn how money actually works. So the father goes home and hands his son $3,000 in cash.
But the catch is phenomenal. The father says, here is the $3,000. But you are explicitly forbidden from using it to buy a car.
Right. First, the father mandates that the son sit down and play the cash flow board game with him, drilling the mechanics of income, expenses, assets, and liabilities into the kid's head.
Learning the language.
Then he buys him a subscription to the Wall Street Journal and hands him a stack of books on stock market fundamentals. The proposition is this: the son has to open a brokerage account and use that $3,000 to actively trade stocks. If he can use his newly acquired knowledge to turn that $3,000 into $6,000, he is allowed to use the $3,000 in profit to buy his car. And the original $3,000 of principal goes straight into his college fund.
The psychological shift that occurs in the teenager is fascinating. He starts trading, he catches a lucky break early on and makes some money, which hooks him.
Of course.
Then the market turns, he makes some emotional trades, and he loses a significant chunk of the capital. But instead of getting discouraged, his interest becomes an obsession. When the father updates the author months later, he reveals the son's account is down to its last $1,000.
But the father isn't angry. He tells the author that losing that $2,000 was the greatest investment in his son's education he could have ever made.
If it has sparked something.
The boy was no longer whining about a car. He was up late voraciously reading financial filings. He was studying technical indicators. He was going to the library to research market history. He had discovered a game that was infinitely more complex and engaging than driving around a suburban cul-de-sac. He was developing a profound respect for the power of capital, a respect that would compound over his entire lifetime.
That story perfectly encapsulates the author's philosophy on consumption. He isn't a monk. He doesn't preach radical frugality. He loves luxuries. He explicitly talks about his love for his Porsche.
Oh yeah, he loves his toys.
But the absolute line in the sand is that he refuses to buy those luxuries on credit. He refuses to enter the trap of trying to keep up with the Joneses by inflating his liability column. When he deeply desires a new toy, a luxury, or a vacation, he doesn't focus his energy on finding a bank to lend him the money. He focuses his financial genius entirely on the asset column.
He weaponizes his own desire. If he wants the Porsche, the rule is he must first build, buy, or create an asset that generates enough passive cash flow to cover the monthly payment of the Porsche.
The asset pays for the liability.
Exactly. The luxury becomes the reward for executing a successful investment. Too many people take the path of least resistance. They borrow the money to get the instant gratification, which guarantees long-term financial slavery. The text issues a very grim warning. Money is an incredibly powerful, indifferent force. If you are not continually educating yourself to be smarter than your money, it will run you over. You will spend your entire life working for it rather than forcing it to obey you.
Let's bring it home with the intangibles. These are the psychological hacks and philosophical principles that tie the whole system together. Step 9 is choose heroes, the power of myth. And he starts with a very nostalgic premise here.
Very nostalgic.
Think back to when you were a kid playing sports in the backyard. You didn't just swing a bat. You announced that it was the bottom of the ninth, Game 7 of the World Series, and you were Willie Mays or Hank Aaron. You mimicked their stance. You adopted their swagger.
And there is real psychological power in that childhood play. When you act out the persona of your hero, you temporarily bypass your own insecurities and limitations. You tap into their perceived power.
So what does this all mean for adults?
As we become adults, we are told to grow up, be realistic, and stop pretending. We lose access to that cognitive bypass. The author, however, actively refuses to let it go. He treats his financial heroes, titans like Warren Buffett, Peter Lynch, George Soros, and Jim Rogers, with the exact same reverence a kid has for a baseball star. He studies their stats, he reads their letters to shareholders, he memorizes their greatest trades.
And he deploys this practically. When he is sitting at a negotiating table, feeling intimidated or unsure, he will consciously channel the aggressive bravado of a Donald Trump. He asks himself, what would Trump demand in this situation?
Channeling that energy.
When he is staring at a complex, chaotic market trend, he will try to evaluate it through the cold, rational, analytical framework of Warren Buffett. By adopting the persona of a master, he gains access to a level of raw, uninhibited thinking he couldn't reach on his own.
It's a brilliant way to overcome the fear of complexity. The financial services industry intentionally uses jargon and complex math to make investing seem terrifying to the average person. They want you to believe it's too hard, so you'll hand your money over to them and pay their management fees.
Right.
Heroes neutralize that intimidation. When you deeply study a master at work, they make the impossible look elegant and simple. They install a subconscious belief in your brain. If a guy from Omaha can figure this out and become a billionaire, I can figure out how to buy a duplex. Heroes inspire you to act.
And that leads us to the final piece of the framework, step 10. Teach and you shall receive the power of giving. The author closes the loop by comparing the divergent philosophies of his two primary father figures.
The two dads.
His highly educated biological dad was a career teacher. He gave away thousands of hours of his time and knowledge, but he almost never gave away money. His stance was logical to most people. He said he would gladly give to charity or the church as soon as he had some extra money left over at the end of the month. But of course, because of how his income and expenses were structured, there was never any extra.
Contrast that with his rich dad, who operated on a completely different paradigm. His rich dad was a devout believer in the concept of tithing. He gave money away consistently to his church and to various charities, even during periods when his own businesses were experiencing severe cash flow shortages.
Even when it hurt.
He didn't wait for the surplus. His fundamental belief was based on the universal principle of reciprocity. If you want something, you must first give it away.
It sounds almost mystical, but the author swears by its practical efficacy. He says if you're feeling a squeeze, if you are short on money, give a little money away, and it will return in multiples.
It creates flow.
If you are struggling to make sales in your business, stop focusing on your own quota and spend a week actively helping a colleague make their sales. The momentum will come back to you.
Yeah.
If you need a high-level introduction, leverage your network to connect two other people first.
The analogy he provides to illustrate this is hilariously on point. Imagine a man sitting in a freezing cold, uninsulated cabin in the dead of winter. He is holding an armful of dry firewood. He is staring at an empty pot-bellied stove, shivering violently and yelling at the iron, "When you give me some heat, then I'll put some wood in you."
It's so backwards.
It is a patently absurd image, but that is precisely how the majority of the population approaches wealth, relationships, and happiness. You cannot wait for the warmth. You have to put the wood in first. You must initiate the cycle of giving.
But the author is very careful to address the nuance here because human beings are manipulative. He admits there were times in his life when he gave money or time and absolutely nothing came back. The universe was quiet.
Why was that?
When he sat down and did a rigorous autopsy of his motives, he realized the flaw. He was giving in order to receive. It was a covert transaction. He was treating the universe like a vending machine. The principle of reciprocity only truly unlocks when you give without expectation, simply for the profound joy that the act of giving generates.
Furthermore, the text highlights that teaching is perhaps the highest leverage form of giving, especially for the giver. Both of his father figures were master teachers, albeit in different domains. The author notes that whenever he feels his own financial knowledge getting stale, he actively seeks out people who genuinely want to learn and teaches them what he knows.
Teaching as a learning tool.
And without fail, the act of explaining a concept forces him to clarify his own thinking. The questions his students ask illuminate his blind spots. Teaching creates a vacuum that pulls a torrent of new ideas, finer distinctions, and deeper understanding back into his own mind. You can attempt to grind your way to wealth in total isolation, hoarding your secrets, but it is an incredibly difficult, lonely path. It is infinitely more efficient to engage the law of reciprocity and be wildly generous with your capital and your knowledge.
Okay, let's take a breath and synthesize the sheer volume of what we've just unpacked. We have taken the conventional, widely accepted script for living, the script that tells you to be a passive consumer, to trade your time for a fixed wage, to pay everyone else first, and to pray the government catches you when you fall, and we've completely dismantled it.
We tore it down.
We've replaced it with a framework of radical, aggressive learning. It's about building a psychological fortress around your asset column, ruthlessly managing your internal discipline, using the pressure of your desires to force innovation, and actively engineering your environment to support your financial genius.
And the most important takeaway, as the source material established right at the beginning, is that these 10 steps are not meant to be a rigid, dogmatic religion. They are a flexible scaffolding. The power is in the daily choice.
Your daily vote.
Once you actively choose to wake up your financial genius, it is more than capable of adapting these steps, discarding what doesn't serve your specific goals, and inventing entirely new formulas. The gold is there, you just have to choose to open your eyes.
So as we close out this deep dive, I want to leave you with one final practical thought experiment to mull over. We've spent the last hour dissecting the necessity of treating your mind as your ultimate asset, auditing your social circle, and fiercely guarding the information you consume. But right now, as this audio finishes, I want you to perform a physical audit.
A physical audit.
Look around the room you are sitting in. Look at the objects taking up space on your shelves. Open your phone and look at the apps you use the most and the recurring subscriptions hitting your credit card. Look at the last 10 text conversations you engaged in.
The evidence.
If a totally independent, ruthless auditor were to evaluate that specific data set, what would be their conclusion? Would the evidence suggest you are actively, aggressively preparing to be wealthy? Or would the evidence definitively prove you are just paying to be comfortable? Don't hide from the answer. Identify just one liability in your daily routine, a habit, an app, a mindset that you can transform into an asset before you go to sleep tonight. Keep training your eyes. The gold is everywhere.